A mysterious man is running some tests on his computer when he receives an encrypted message. After decrypting the message, an AI appears and speaks to him in real time, stating that it is aware of the man's work being terminated. On the computer, a file named Transfiguration Project appears. However, the AI has a plan to finish the mysterious man's project. Hesitantly, the man asks why, to which the AI responds that it is the only thing powerful enough to stop what's coming. The end of the world. The scene changes to a TV interview with an astrophysicist named Michael Swafford about his new book titled, In the End, There Was Light. Michael discussed the gamma-ray burst, GRB, in his book. The astrophysicist believes that a GRB will be the cause of humanity's extinction in the universe. Michael explains that a GRB is caused by a dying star releasing two narrow beams of intense radiation. He then confirms that AWR 104 is a dying star in the Milky Way galaxy. Unfortunately, Earth is directly in the path of the beam zone. In other words, it's as if you're facing a gun barrel. Then, a computer screen is displayed on which DNA from various people is examined until a perfect match for a test subject is found. Following that, a man named Joseph Stedman, also known as Joe, watches a recorded video of his pregnant wife, Heather, and his daughter, Zoe, on TV. Joe and Heather discuss potential names for their upcoming child. Joe suggests that they should name the baby Rhea, which means ray of light. The Stedmans appear to be a happy family in the video, in contrast to Joe's current miserable state. Unbeknownst to Joe, he is being watched through a hidden camera in his lampshade. Joe is the one chosen for the Transfiguration Project. It turns out that he is being watched at all times by the mysterious man from earlier, who turns out to be a mad scientist. Observation reveals that Joe is undergoing therapy for depression, suicidal ideation, and anger management issues. The mad scientist is also keeping an eye on Joe's daughters. Joe then leaves his family after Heather dies. As a result, Zoe holds a grudge against her father. Even without her father's help, Zoe grows into a strong, independent woman. She's also dating Michael Swafford. Meanwhile, Rhea, like her father, develops a drug addiction. The two sisters lead polar opposite lives. Zoe and Michael are flirting in a library. Michael drops the stack of books that they have gathered as he leans in for a kiss. Zoe tells Michael about the fate page when they pick up. When a book falls, the page it's open to can be read as a fortune and applied to one's life. It's similar to a fortune-telling game she and Rhea used to play. Zoe makes Michael try the fate page from a medical book. Although the statement is strictly medical, the bottom line of the statement tells about the sacrifice of one to save all. Returning to Joe, who is still speaking with his therapist, he shares that he has been hired at a government-funded facility. What's strange is that he never applied, but the facility somehow got his name and hired him. Despite his reservations, Joe accepts the position. Joe is later rewarded for being substance-free for a year. Joe recalls the days when he had everything: a loving wife, two lovely daughters, a dog, and a place to call home. Joe then goes to see Zoe and attempts to make amends with her. Joe tries his hardest to convince her that he has changed and that he and Zoe can help Rhea. However, Zoe is not yet prepared. Joe insists on giving her his gift, but Michael stands between Joe and Zoe. Joe, enraged, punched Michael and grabbed him by the neck. Joe, too, is taken aback by what he has just done. Later that night, Zoe attempts to call Rhea, but she does not answer her phone. Zoe suspects her sister is using drugs again. Michael consoles her and assures Zoe that he will never abandon her. Joe also attempts to contact Rhea but is directed to voicemail. In a flashback, Heather asks Joe to promise her that he will be strong for their daughters. Joe apologizes to Heather for failing to keep his promise. After a year of abstinence, he reintroduces alcohol. Unfortunately, he failed to notice that someone was hiding in the back seat. The man suddenly covers Joe's head with plastic and kidnaps him. The mad scientist finally reveals himself to be Mike. It is then shown that something is injected into Joe's eye. Joe wakes up in the streets, exhausted and perplexed by the voice in his head. He then discovers a small briefcase containing a gun. Mike presses a key on his keyboard, and Joe screams in agony. Mike explains that they implanted a device through Joe's optic nerve. It allows them to see what Joe sees while also forcing Joe to see what they want him to see. Mike has Joe accompany Rhea to the drugstore. Mike also tells Joe that he has been spying on his family for some time. He then makes Joe see Zoe smoking while claiming that his family is now broken as a result of him. He is manipulating Joe's conscience in order to get Joe to follow him. A woman named Sabi arrives and inquires as to what is going on. Joe tells her to call the cops, but Mike blackmails Joe. He tells Joe to kill the woman or Rhea will die. Joe picks up the gun and pulls the trigger, but nothing happens. Mike informs Joe that he will now be Joe's higher power. However, Sabi, who turns out to be Mike's accomplice, touches Joe when he looks back at her. Meanwhile, it has been discovered that a dying star is emitting a gamma ray burst into space. Sabi informs Mike that everything is ready. Joe, on the other hand, awakens to find himself trapped in a small space. He attempts to dial 911, but the operator informs him that if he contacts the authorities again, they will kill his daughters. Joe is finally let out of his car trunk after agreeing to Mike's terms. Mike orders Joe to go somewhere while watching him through a drone. The scene shifts to Zoe watching a video of herself and Rhea on her phone. She tries again but fails. Returning to Joe, Mike directs him to enter the home of a man named Charles Margery. When Mike enters Charles's room, he orders Joe to threaten Charles with opening his safe. Joe is still hesitant to follow Mike's every command. But if Mike shows Joe a gun pointing at his daughter's head, he will have no choice but to obey. When Joe arrives at the safe, he instructs Charles to authorize the laptop. Joe is then told to place his finger on the laptop's fingerprint scanner. Data from Joe's DNA appears, and the label, sequence compatible, confirms that he is the one they are looking for. Even Charles cannot believe what he has just witnessed. Joe then places a metallic LED device on the laptop. This enables Sabi to copy all of the files on Charles's laptop. Mike instructs Joe to remove Charles after they have obtained what they require. But Joe refuses to do so. Joe was distracted and didn't notice that Charles had already armed himself and knocked him down. Charles quickly takes up the gun. Joe reveals himself to Charles and tells him about the man who is giving him orders. Meanwhile, Charles cannot believe that his employee is the match. Charles then examines Joe's eye, noticing the optic implant. Realizing Mike can see and hear him, Charles declares that the Transfiguration Project has been halted because it is too dangerous. Mike directs Joe to proceed, not realizing that Charles will be killed by the drone. Finally, Joe is told to cut off Charles's thumb. Joe then goes to his workplace, Redlock. Simultaneously, Sabi's drone releases mini drones that make their way to the building's vent system. As Joe puts on his mask, the drones release chemicals that kill everyone in the building who breathes them in. Joe begs Mike to stop. But he only shows Joe that the same drone is in his daughter's room, ready to be activated if he does not arrive at the main facility in 4 minutes. Joe dashes to the main facility as soon as he is able. Taking a key card from security, the security guard who turns out to be alive manages to shoot his gun. Joe avoids the shot, but it's so close to his ear that it interferes with Mike's audio feed. Fortunately, the audio feed was reconnected in time for Joe to arrive at the main facility. He then uses Charles's thumb to grant Mike and Sabi access to the core. Joe inquires as to the well-being of his daughter. But Mike gives him one last order to protect his daughter's life. Joe is told to go inside the machine and turn on the throw switch. However, it is merely a trap. When Joe enters the machine, the door closes and the machine turns on. Joe questions Mike's actions. Mike simply tells him that it's in his DNA to be the ideal subject. Mike also adds that when the universe decides what it wants, there is no point in resisting. The Transfiguration project has begun. Joe's DNA starts to change. The procedure then results in a large explosion in the building. While Mike is relaxing to violin music, the aftermath of the explosion is devastating. The AI asks Mike if it was successful, and the mad scientist says yes. Joe has survived and is now ready for testing. Meanwhile, Michael is comforting Zoe, who is sobbing after hearing about the explosion on Redlock. Zoe regrets not giving his father a chance while he was still alive. She also wishes she had never given up on him. But, as previously stated, Joe is still alive and wakes up in his home, wrapped in a large foil bag. Joe inquires as to what Mike has done to him. Instead of answering his question, Mike speaks about scientific topics that Joe is unfamiliar with. Joe tries to call his daughter, but the phone isn't working. Joe, enraged, emits an energy force that affects the electrical appliances around him. Joe's hand begins to emit lights. Enraged, he punches a wall and easily destroys the wall of his bathroom. Mike is taken aback by what he is witnessing. Mike explains that he turns Joe's weakness into his strength. Joe's rage, fear, anxiety, and general chaos are now the source of his infinite power. Mike adds that Joe can use his newfound abilities to save his family's life. He then assigns Joe a new mission. Joe has no choice but to obey Mike's command. He rushes outside, only to discover that his car has vanished. Joe's power is later revealed to be electromagnetism. Joe starts a motorcycle by simply expending some energy. Joe grows stronger as he becomes more enraged. As he swings his pendulum, Mike explains that everything is just a matter of cause and effect. To put Joe to the test, Mike assigns him to confront a man named Nico Sola, the man who is to blame for Ray's addiction and taking advantage of her. Meanwhile, Zoe notices the gift Joe had placed in her bag earlier. When she opens it, she sees the rock she gave him as a child, proving that Joe always loved her no matter what. The scene shifts back to Joe approaching what appears to be a warehouse. Joe wanders around until he finds a man and asks if he's Nico. Instead of responding, the man points his camera at Joe and flashes at his eyes before fleeing. Joe pursues him, but his unfamiliarity with the area gives Nico the advantage of ambushing him. Nico ties Joe up and asks for his name. As Joe says his surname, Nico realizes he is Ray's father. Nico then smacks him and shows him a videotape with the name, Rhea, on it. Rhea is drugged out and completely messed up in the video, while Nico molests her. Joe recalls the time when his sweet innocent Rhea baked a cake for him. Joe loses his cool and emits massive amounts of electromagnetic energy. However, Mike's computer reports that the massive energy failed and that a higher stress level is required. Returning to Joe, the building is on fire as a result of the explosion. Nico stabs him, but Joe's body absorbs the knife. Another man shoots at Joe, but the bullets just pass through him. Joe retaliates by pulling out a knife and stabbing the man who shot him. However, as the knife passed through the man's neck, it transformed into energy. Meanwhile, Nico manages to get into his car before Joe catches up with him. It is because Joe comes to a halt to assist a woman in exiting the warehouse. Nico intends to hit Joe, but Mike forces him to watch Ray's video again, heightening Joe's rage. This enables Joe to emit more electromagnetic energy. But this time, in a concentrated area aimed at Nico's direction. Joe inquires as to what is wrong with him, but Mike simply informs him that he has failed once more. He also informs Joe that the police are on their way and instructs him to turn himself in so that he can reflect deeper within himself. However, instead of following Mike, Joe attempts to flee. Unfortunately, the police still cornered and arrested him. After some time, Joe is interrogated about what he knows about the Redlock incident and other recent blasts. Despite the fact that Joe is telling the truth to the investigators, they do not believe him. They question Joe's employer, believing he is a terrorist. Mike instructs Joe to claim he is working for a higher power, which only adds to Joe's craziness in the eyes of the investigators. He is then told that there is a bomb in the port. The cops rush to the port. However, Mike tells Joe that if he gets to the bomb first, everyone will live. However, if the police arrived first, approximately 20,000 people would be killed. Joe bursts out again, stressed, but fails to transform. He then rushes to the port. Mike hints to Joe that the bomb is in a shipping crate. Meanwhile, Zoe follows the hot pursuit of his father on the news. Zoe can't believe Joe is still alive and being blamed for the recent explosions. Joe's body begins to glow in the car as he finally transforms into pure energy, blasting his way through the city. The news crew captures a live shot of the light blasts inside Joe's vehicle. Mike is just sitting in his chair, watching Joe until his computer reports that Joe's transformation has finally stabilized. Then his men storm into Zoe's house. Michael is powerless to stop the armed men who are kidnapping them. Meanwhile, the police arrive at the port and immediately begin searching for the bomb. Joe, in his full mass of energy form, also arrives at the port. He quickly causes every shipping crate to levitate into the air. The explosion goes off in the air. However, the impact scatters other shipping crates, causing one to collide with an airplane. The plane collides with a train. Fortunately, Joe is able to save both the plane and the train by using his electromagnetic energy. He prevents the plane from collapsing further while also preventing the train from falling down the tracks. Joe then goes to Zoe's house but finds nothing but a laptop. Mike mocks Joe's cowardice. He then shows Joe that he has Zoe and Michael. Joe finds Mike and Zoe's hideout by touching the laptop screen. Joe forms a shield around Zoe and Michael as he destroys the hideout of the man who put him in this situation. The security guards look up in horror as they see Joe's form for the first time. They try to take him down, but Joe easily dispatches them as he continues to wreak havoc in the area. While talking to his daughter, Joe manifests an image of his former self. He reassures Zoe that everything is fine and that they will go get Rhea. Meanwhile, Michael looks at Joe as if he's seen a god. After some flashbacks, it is revealed that the AI Mike is talking to from the start is actually a video feed of Michael. Michael is the one who persuades Mike to pursue the Transfiguration project. The scene shifts to outer space, where the gamma-ray burst is already on its way to Earth. Mike directs Michael to shoot Zoe as the beam approaches the planet. Joe, furious, blasts Michael away. He immediately attends to his daughter, assuring her that they will return home. Unfortunately, Zoe dies after pleading with her father for forgiveness. Joe clings to her dead daughter, repeatedly apologizing. He recalls the last time he hugged Heather, Zoe, and Rhea all at once. Mike finally gets up from his chair to observe Joe's grief over Zoe. To make matters worse, Joe notices on a monitor that Mike's men storm into Ray's apartment. They put the gun in her hand and then blow her head off to make it appear as if she committed suicide. Losing both Zoe and Rhea is the final straw for Joe. He completely loses it because everyone he cares about is now gone. Joe erupts as massive electromagnetic energy. It is so massive that he becomes the Earth's shield. Joe became his own god after attaining omnipotence. And in his dying words, Mike submits to Joe while uttering the phrase, "Deliver us." Joe shielded the Earth from a dying star's gamma-ray burst in space. Despite failing to protect his girls, Joe manages to protect mankind by becoming its protector. But this doesn't stop Joe from keeping his promise to Heather. Joe uses his omnipotence to resurrect Zoe and Rhea. Zoe and Rhea awaken on the beach where their family used to vacation. The film concludes with Zoe whispering 143 and Joe repeating it as his energy embraces planet Earth.